Yes, so as I was already introduced, I've been doing testing for about 10 years now. I've been doing automation for about 6, and I can barely see you, so sorry if I look very weird to you. I've been working with a company called Frequentis in the aviation industry, and we have all kinds of interesting projects there, so if you're curious about it, just talk to me after I'm done with the speech. And today I want to talk to you about Selenium tests and how to have reliable Selenium tests. I will share my experience and I will share how I write my tests so that they are not flaky and problematic. Afterwards, I will actually share with you a GitHub project I have where you can see most of the code examples that I will show today and that you can actually use in your own project also. So, what is the biggest issue when it comes to Selenium tests? It's all about timing, right? Whenever you want to check for something on the page, whenever you want to interact with the page, something is not ready. You're trying to click on a button, but the button is not yet enabled, for example. Or maybe you want to read the properties of an element and the element has not yet fully loaded. What do you do with that? Well, many times I've seen that you do retries. You retry to do the same action over and over again. You retry your tests. But that's not always a good idea because if you just retry the same code, it doesn't mean it's going to succeed. So, what I use is the so-called WebDriverWait. This is from Selenium. You can take a look in the library. And whenever you want to have reliable tests, you can just wait for whatever you want to check in your tests. And the WebDriverWait looks something like this. You need to specify the driver, so you need to open a WebDriver instance. You need to open your browser, right? So you need to pass in the driver there, and then you need to specify a timeout. How long do you want to wait for a condition to happen? Do you want to wait a second, or do you want to wait 30 seconds? Depending on the timeout, you have better chances to make your test reliable, meaning that if you have a test environment where something is really, really slow, if you have a timeout of 30 seconds, then you might be able to actually wait until something has happened on the page. The lower the timeout value, the less chances that in the test environment your test will pass. But I will show you some examples of how to deal with the timeout. And the most important part of this syntax is that you need to wait until something happens, until an expected condition happens on the page. How does this work? Well, you specify the timeout, and you specify the condition that you want to wait for. Every half a second, that condition is being checked for by that code that I just showed you. So every half a second, you try to see if, for example, your page has loaded, or if the element that you try to click on was clicked. If during that timeout you didn't manage to have your condition accomplished, you will just fail with a timeout exception. So if you are going to see a timeout exception in your code, you will know that what you were waiting for never happened. If below this threshold of the timeout value the condition happened, then the test will just continue executing from that point on. So basically, if you want to wait for 30 seconds, many times you won't wait that long because many times maybe the condition was done in 3 seconds or 5 seconds or 10 seconds. It depends on your environment. What can we wait for in a test? Well, as a disclaimer, I put almost in this sentence. So you can wait for almost everything that happens on your web page. I said almost because, honestly, I haven't encountered a situation for which I couldn't write a custom wait. But there might be, so I'm not saying that it's impossible. But in my tests, during the years, what I waited for are some of these things. For a URL in the browser to be equal to a URL, or to continue with to contain a URL, to start with a URL, to have some spaces in the URL or not have spaces, or be uppercase or lowercase, and so on. The same with element attribute. Element attributes are, for example, classes or sources for the images or the URLs that open when you click on a link. All of these attributes are something that you can wait for. You can also wait for an element text. So when you're looking at the page, you can wait for that element to have a specific text. Let's say that maybe you clicked on something and you want to see a success message. You can wait for that success message or that container where the message will be displayed to contain the text that you expect to be there. You also can wait for the page to be loaded, for the element to be visible or to be clickable or for it to be checked. And you can also wait, for example, for a dropdown to be populated or for an element to be in view. Many times, the element that you want to interact with is not displayed like in the page when you open it, but you need to scroll down to see it. You can do a custom wait for that also. You can basically create your own custom waits based on WebDriverWait to wait for whatever you need in your project. Sometimes the waits that are by default implemented in Selenium will not be enough for you. Maybe you need to do something fancier. So for that, you can just create your own class, as I did already. I created a waiter class in which I hold all my custom wait methods. And I've created wait methods for all kinds of things depending on the project where I was testing. I will show you at the end of the talk the most awful wait I ever had to create, but which solved a problem that I had in one of my tests. It was very long, it was very complicated, but once I had that written, my test always passed. In that class, I usually put all my methods, and I also define a constant called Timeout, so that whenever I want to use my custom wait methods, I don't have to specify the timeout value. I have a default one, which I can change because it's in only one place. So if I want to increase my timeout, I just have to change the constant value. And then all of my tests that call all of the wait methods will by default have the new timeout value. But also, if I want to have a different timeout value, I can create another version of my wait methods to which I will pass the timeout that I want. In my tests, I'm not using the Selenium commands directly anymore. So I'm not saying driver.get when I want to open a page. I'm saying waiter.get because I have my custom waiter method that will open the page reliably. I will show you what it does. Also, when I'm trying to click on an element, I'm not saying element.click. This is the command from Selenium. I'm saying waiter.click or waiter.click and wait for something to occur after I clicked on that. This makes all my tests reliable because all of my tests are just wait after wait after wait. So I don't have any more points where the test can fail due to the timeout issue. All of my tests will possibly take a little bit longer to run, but they will not fail randomly because somewhere I didn't wait enough. And because of this, I can change a little bit the way I write my tests. I don't need that many assertions in my test anymore. Whenever you're doing something with Selenium, you would probably do something like open the page, click on a button, and assert that a web element appeared on the page after you clicked on it. The assertion is the point of failure. When you're doing the assert, you're not waiting for something to happen. You're just checking at the moment when the assertion executes that the condition was met there. However, if instead of the assertion you're using the wait, you're checking for the same thing. So you still check that the web element appeared after you clicked on a button, but you're actually waiting for it to be there. So you don't just wait for like 30 milliseconds for the condition to have happened. You're waiting for the timeout value. So you can wait up to 30 seconds for that condition to happen. And you don't need to use the assertion because the wait implies that if the wait didn't throw a timeout exception, the condition was met. Okay? So this way you can simplify a little bit your code. And also using your custom wait methods, you can shorten your tests. You can write less code because you will have a lot of the code stored into your wait methods. And I will show you a little bit some examples of how to use your waits, how to create custom waits. For example, the basic thing or the first thing that you will start with, you need to open a page, right? How would you normally open a page? Well, you would say driver.get the URL, and many times I've seen this in tests. People say sleep for 5 seconds before you're doing something. This is bad because you have 5 seconds that you need to wait for all the time. You have a hard-coded timeout value there. As I said, the page might load in maybe 1 minute or maybe in 5 seconds. You don't need to put the hard-coded value there. An improvement to this code is to create a wait method that waits for the page to load. So for that, you're going to say driver.getURL as you did before, but instead of using the thread sleep, you will have a wait method here I called it wait for page load complete. And this wait method is a custom one that I wrote, and it looks something like this. As you can see here, I have a new WebDriverWait. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I passed in the WebDriver instance and a timeout value, and then I'm waiting for something to happen. And in my case, this is the method that basically checks that the page has loaded completely. This is an AJAX query that executes and returns the so-called document ready state attribute of the page. So this is something that's implemented in the DOMs of the pages that of the web pages that you're testing. And if the value for that property is complete, then the page has loaded properly. And this is the way I wait for my page to load every time. But if I go back to this example, I can see that every time I want to open a page, I need to remember to say driver.get the URL, so open the page. And then I need to remember that I also need to wait for it to load. So these are two lines of code that I need to write all the time, and I need to remember that I need both of them whenever I open a page. This means that, for example, if I have to open 1,000 pages, then I will have 2,000 lines of code, which is 1,000 too many, really. Because you can improve on this, and you can create your own get method, which is nothing more than the method that I have here, which says driver.get URL, which was the first part in the earlier screen. So this is the part where I open a URL, and then I'm just waiting for the page to load completely. So this way, whenever I want to open a page, instead of saying driver.get URL and sleep, I'm just going to say waiter.get URL. I named it get simply because it helps me kind of link the get to this get here from the driver implementation. So I know that get always means open a page. Get from my waiter class means get and wait for the page to load properly before doing anything else. So this is just the first example. What about when I want to interact with an element on the page? Let's say you want to click on the element. What can go wrong? Well, you can get any of these exceptions that I've listed here. Who knows the stale element reference exception? Yes, thank you. Sometimes the element you're trying to click on is in an invalid state, or maybe it's not even there when you're trying to click on it. So what can you do? You can wait for the element before you're doing something with it. And let's say that you want to click on it, and for that you can create your own custom click method. And this does nothing more than it tries to click on the element here. And if it manages to click on the element, it will return true. Okay? The way the wait works is that inside the wait, you need to have a Boolean condition. And if the Boolean condition was fulfilled, then the wait method exits successfully. So here, my Boolean condition is that I managed to click on the button. Okay? If you know how the click works, click will never return true or false. If the click was unsuccessful, it will return all kinds of exceptions, the ones that I just showed you, the invalid and the stale and so on. So, because we're dealing with exceptions here, I put a try and catch. So in the try, if I manage to click on it, I will return true. However, any exception that I encountered will yield in false. So now the WebDriverWait says, oh, did you manage to click on it? If the answer is true, then just exit successfully and the rest of the test can be executed. If not, here I will return false. And this little line of code, wait until, is checking that Boolean value. And if it says false, try again. It goes back and it tries to click on the element again. And it goes like that, again and again, trying to click on the element until no exception was encountered. And when that happens, when the click was successful, two things happen. You managed to click on the button, and you also successfully exited this method, and you have waited for the element to be clickable for an amount of time. As I said, you specified the timeout, so this might happen in maybe 5 seconds, but it happens. If your page is working properly, if you don't have bugs on your page, this click will happen during that time. So, clicking on a page usually triggers all kinds of events on the page. Maybe something will be displayed, maybe the page refreshes, Maybe another URL is open, who knows what, depending on your pages that you're testing. So let's say that after you clicked on the button, you need to check that for a web element you have on the page, a certain text is displayed on it. So when you're calling element getText, you have an expected value there. The old way of doing this would be button.click. So this would be the first approach, the old approach. An enhancement to this approach would be button.click, and then you could create a custom wait method, which would say wait for element text equals a value. Who is this wait method here? It's nothing more than a very simple wait method, which just says element.getText.equals some string. And this evaluates to a Boolean value, so you don't need to do the whole try-catch thing. Whenever you're calling this wait method, you will have to pass in the element for which you're checking the text and the expected string. So this code will just check that on this element, the expected string is displayed, and once it is, the method exits successfully. But here again, we just have we have 2 lines of code, right? So we can actually mix these 2 lines of code in just 1 line of code where we implement an even more custom method that says click and wait for element text. And here we just need to provide the button that we need to click on, the element whose text we are trying to check, and then which is the expected string we want to see there. And this way, again, we have reduced our code from 3 lines as we had initially to just 1 line, and we've also made it very reliable. So here we have the improvements that we are shortening our tests. We are also having the test a little bit clearer because here the method says click and wait for something, so we know exactly what we are doing in that step. But it's also very reliable. What about the example here? So this is a little bit more complicated. So we're opening a page. This is the first step. Then we're sleeping for 5 seconds before doing anything else. Then we want to make sure that an element is displayed before doing anything with it. So we're putting an asserttrue element is displayed there. If it is, then we want to click on it. Then again, we want to sleep because we want to check for another element there. This is bad, firstly, because the asserttrue element is displayed. It shouldn't even be there. It shouldn't be there because if you want to click on something, at the moment you're clicking on it, you will realize whether it's displayed or not anyway. If it's not, you will get an exception. If it was, then the click will be fine. So these are 2 lines of code you don't even need. Next, what will we do with this? In order to have a reliable test here, we will make it something like this. Instead of opening the page and sleeping, and then checking for the element that we want to click on to be displayed, we're just going to say, get the URL and wait for element to be displayed. Which means, inside here, we will open the URL, we will wait for the page to be loaded completely, and we will also wait for that web element to be present. And in the second line of code, we will click on the element, and then we will wait for another one to be displayed. So this will shorten the initial test from, I think it was 6 lines of code, to just 2 lines of code. And you can do this in every test that you have. You can just use the custom waits to replace that hard-coded timeout, and you can even make it more readable. Okay? Another example is when you want to wait for an element attribute. The element attribute can be, as I said, maybe a class. Classes are something that we use quite a lot. So here we can just create a very custom method where we're just checking that the element that we're passing as a parameter has an attribute, which again we pass as a parameter, whose value equals an expected string. And in this case, I also pass in a different value for the timeout because maybe in this test I want to wait a little bit more than the regular timeout because I might know that this is a problematic element. Because we're using waits, we have a higher chance of our tests passing because we're waiting for everything to happen. We have more confidence in our tests, and we don't need to use any more hard weights. These are the benefits of using our weights. And this is the most complicated weight I've ever needed to do, which basically, in a few words, is I'm trying to create a new dropdown. And whenever I wanted to create this specific dropdown, either the first line of this code failed or the second one failed. Or if these didn't fail, when I wanted to select the value from the dropdown, it didn't select it. It was just empty. So I did a try-catch for these two parts. And if these failed, I went here and I returned false. So I started again. And then, if I was successful with this, I just returned whether the value was the expected one. And if it was, then I exited the method. If it wasn't, I started it all over again, and so on until I managed to create the selector or select the dropdown, and until I actually managed to select the value from it. All of the examples that I've shown here and some other weight methods you can find in this GitHub location here. This is the library I created with all the weights. So here you can find the waiter class that I've used in this example, and you can actually import it into your project because it's a Java standalone project, a small Java library that you can use in your Maven projects, Gradle projects, and so on, wherever you need them. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was really great. Before we jump into the questions, I just want to remind you that please rate the talk in the app because this is very important for the conference and also for the speaker. So, but let's see the questions now. So the first one: what was the most tricky weight that you had to solve?
That one on the last slide. So that was really, really tricky because so it was just a simple thing: select a value from the dropdown, but it failed in a very random way, and it took a little bit of time for me to understand what was happening there. So I needed to do a lot of debug, and that was just a part of the code in that weight. So there was more. It was really, really long.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Next question is it necessary to wait for each element, or is that a good approach to if we wait for the page to be fully loaded?
This depends on how your application is implemented. Maybe some of those elements are loaded dynamically. So maybe they don't load when the page loads. Maybe there is some interaction with the page that triggers them. In that case, you're supposed to also wait for those elements to be displayed independently of the page.
Okay, thank you. Next one. Do you think that timeouts should be tested with Selenium test? Do you have best practices for that?
What do you mean if timeouts should be tested? Like if the application is not responding in the appropriate amount of time? I mean, probably I would do such a test. It depends on the requirements, basically. So if you have to test something like this, yes, you can use the weights. Because the weights are, you can wait for as long as you want. And then you already have the page there, and you can do all kinds of checks on it to see what has happened with the page in that timeout period. So yes, you can use it.
Okay, our time is up. So thank you once again for the talk.
I just want to answer the next one. How much effort? I did that in my spare time, so it's nothing. It's okay.